The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the cramped gun shop, casting harsh shadows across the worn wooden counter. Sarah Martinez stood barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, her petite frame dwarfed by the towering display cases filled with hunting rifles and tactical weapons. Her manicured nails, painted a subtle rose color, drummed against the glass as she examined a particularly complex AR-15 variant. The contradiction wasn't lost on the 3 men behind the counter. Here was a woman who looked like she belonged in a boardroom or art gallery, not a place that reeked of gun oil and testosterone. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right place?" asked Jake, the shop's owner, his tone carrying that particular brand of condescension reserved for women who dared enter traditionally male spaces. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of handling firearms, gestured dismissively toward the door. "The flower shop is 2 blocks down if you're looking for something more suitable." Sarah's dark eyes flickered with something that might have been amusement or perhaps annoyance. She'd heard variations of this same dismissal her entire life. At 28, she had grown accustomed to being underestimated, to having her capabilities questioned before she'd even had the chance to demonstrate them. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady and measured. "Actually, I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied, her fingers still tracing the outline of the rifle's receiver through the glass. "I'm here about the gunsmith position you advertised." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake exchanged glances with his 2 employees, Marcus, a barrel-chested former Marine with arms like tree trunks, and Tommy, whose NRA cap seemed permanently affixed to his balding head. The job posting had been up for 3 months with no serious applicants. They needed someone with exceptional technical skills, someone who could handle the increasingly complex modifications their high-end clientele demanded. "Listen, sweetheart," Tommy interjected, his voice dripping with false kindness. "This isn't exactly retail work. We're talking about precision machining, advanced ballistics, custom modifications. It requires strength and experience, the kind you don't get from watching YouTube videos." Sarah's smile was razor thin. She reached into her leather satchel and withdrew a thick portfolio, placing it carefully on the counter. The folder was filled with certifications, photographs of custom work, and letters of recommendation from some of the most respected names in the firearms industry. But she knew that wouldn't be enough. It never was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The skepticism in the room was palpable. Marcus leaned against the wall, arms crossed, while Jake flipped through her credentials with barely concealed disinterest. These men had made up their minds the moment she walked in the door. They saw her designer blazer, her carefully styled hair, her delicate features, and they assumed weakness. They assumed incompetence. What they didn't see was the calluses hidden beneath her manicured exterior, evidence of countless hours spent in her father's machine shop as a child. They couldn't know about the nights she'd spent in her garage workshop perfecting techniques that most gunsmiths took years to master. They had no idea that her delicate hands had rebuilt engines, crafted jewelry, and performed microsurgery on vintage timepieces with equal precision. She had always been drawn to mechanical puzzles, to the intricate dance of gears and springs and perfectly calibrated tolerances. While other girls her age were playing with dolls, she was disassembling alarm clocks and bicycles, driven by an insatiable need to understand how things worked. Her father, a retired aircraft mechanic, had recognized this gift early and nurtured it, teaching her that precision had nothing to do with size or gender and everything to do with patience, knowledge, and respect for the craft. But explaining this to Jake and his crew would be pointless. They'd already decided she was unsuitable, another woman who'd wandered into their domain by mistake. She could see it in their body language, in the way they avoided eye contact, in Tommy's increasingly obvious glances toward the clock on the wall. "Look, Miss..." Jake paused, realizing he'd never actually asked her name. "Martinez? Sarah Martinez." "Right. Miss Martinez, I appreciate you coming in, but I think there might be some confusion about the nature of this position. We're not looking for someone to work the register or handle paperwork. This is serious technical work. Dangerous work. It requires someone who can handle heavy machinery, work with volatile chemicals, and manage the physical demands of the job. No offense, but he gestured vaguely at her appearance. The implication hung in the air like cordite smoke. Too small, too delicate, too female. Sarah nodded slowly, as if she understood their concerns. She'd played this scene before, in different settings with different players, but always with the underlying assumptions. The funny thing was, she agreed with them about one thing. This was serious work, the kind of work that demanded absolute precision, unwavering focus, and a deep understanding of mechanical principles. The kind of work she'd been preparing for her entire life. "I understand your concerns," she said, closing her portfolio. "Perhaps a demonstration would be more convincing than credentials." The three men exchanged another look. Jake shrugged, figuring it would be easier to let her embarrass herself quickly than to continue this charade. He unlocked one of the display cases and removed a standard hunting rifle, a Remington 738 caliber. Nothing too complex, but it would require basic field stripping knowledge that I was certain she didn't possess. "All right," he said, placing the rifle on the counter with theatrical care. "Show me you can field strip this without breaking anything or injuring yourself." Sarah accepted the weapon with the same casual confidence she might handle a pen or a coffee cup. Her fingers found the familiar contours of the bolt handle, and for the first time since entering the shop, she felt completely at home.
The Remington 700 felt familiar in Sarah's hands, like greeting an old friend. She'd worked on dozens of these rifles over the years, each one presenting its own unique character and quirks. The metal was cool against her palms, and she could feel the slight wear patterns that spoke of the weapon's history, where the previous owner had gripped it, how often it had been fired, whether it had been properly maintained. Jake, Marcus, and Tommy watched with barely concealed amusement as she examined the rifle. They expected fumbling, perhaps a few nervous questions about safety procedures, even a request for help. What they didn't expect was the methodical way she checked the chamber, engaged the safety, and positioned the weapon for disassembly with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. "First rule," Sarah murmured, more to herself than to her audience. "Always verify the weapon is unloaded." Her fingers worked the bolt with practiced efficiency, ejecting the chambered round and checking the magazine well. The brass cartridge clinked against the counter, and she noted its condition. Well-maintained ammunition, no corrosion or damage to the casing. Tommy snorted. "Everyone knows that. The question is whether you know what comes next." Sarah's response was wordless. Her hands moved with surgical precision, removing the bolt with a series of practice motions that spoke of muscle memory, developed over years of repetition. The bolt slid free with a soft metallic whisper, and she placed it carefully on the counter, oriented so that all the components were visible and accessible. But she didn't stop there. With the bolt removed, she turned her attention to the trigger assembly. Her fingers found the guard screws, front and rear, and began removing them with movements so economical that they seemed effortless. Jake's eyebrows rose slightly. Most casual shooters never bothered with trigger group removal. It wasn't necessary for basic cleaning and required a more intimate knowledge of the weapon's internal mechanics. "She's just showing off," Marcus muttered, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice now. The way she handled the rifle suggested familiarity that went well beyond YouTube tutorials or casual range time. Sarah continued her methodical disassembly, removing the trigger guard and bolt stop with the same fluid efficiency. Each component was placed precisely on the counter, arranged in the exact order of reassembly. It was a habit her father had drilled into her from childhood. Organization wasn't just about neatness. It was about safety and efficiency. A misplaced spring or forgotten washer could mean the difference between a properly functioning weapon and a dangerous malfunction. The stock came next, separated from the barreled action with a careful twist that prevented any stress on the bedding or scope mounts. She noted the quality of the work. Someone had pillar-bedded this rifle, probably for improved accuracy. The modifications were well executed, suggesting the previous owner had invested in professional gunsmithing services. With the major components separated, Sarah turned her attention to the bolt itself. This was where most amateur enthusiasts reached their limit. The bolt assembly contained multiple small parts: firing pin, cocking piece, bolt shroud, extractor, all held in place by precisely calibrated spring tension and mechanical tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Her fingers found the bolt shroud, and began the delicate process of unscrewing it from the bolt body. The threads were fine-pitched and required careful attention to avoid cross-threading. Too much force would damage the components, too little wouldn't achieve proper disassembly. It was a Goldilocks operation that demanded both confidence and restraint. Jake found himself leaning forward despite his skepticism. He had seen plenty of experienced shooters struggle with bolt disassembly, especially on their first attempt with an unfamiliar rifle. The fact that this petite woman was proceeding without hesitation or reference materials was unexpected. The bolt shroud came free with a soft click, revealing the firing pin assembly beneath. Sarah's movements never paused. She depressed the cocking piece and rotated it counterclockwise, releasing the mainspring tension and allowing the firing pin to slide free from the bolt body. The components joined the growing array of parts on the counter, each piece positioned with mathematical precision. "The extractor is next," Sarah said quietly, producing a small punch from her bag. "It's spring-loaded, so you need to be careful not to lose the plunger or spring." Her words were directed at the three men, but her tone suggested she was teaching rather than showing off. She depressed the extractor plunger with the punch and rotated the extractor 90 degrees, allowing it to lift free from its recess in the bolt face. The small spring bounced once on the counter before settling next to its associated components. Sarah caught it without looking, her attention focused on inspecting the extractor for wear patterns and proper spring tension. Everything appeared to be in excellent condition. Whoever owned this rifle took good care of their equipment. Tommy had stopped checking his watch. Marcus had uncrossed his arms. Even Jake seemed to be paying genuine attention now, his initial dismissiveness replaced by grudging curiosity. This woman clearly knew her way around a rifle, but knowledge and physical capability were two different things. Anyone could memorize procedures. It took skill to execute them flawlessly under scrutiny. Sarah reassembled the bolt with the same methodical precision, her movements economical and confident. Each component clicked into place with mechanical satisfaction, the tolerances so perfectly maintained that the assembly felt like it was magnetizing itself together. The firing pin rotated home with a subtle snick, the bolt shroud threaded on smoothly, and the extractor snapped back into position with authority. With the bolt complete, she began reassembling the rifle itself. Trigger group back into the stock, guard screws tightened to proper torque specification without the aid of a torque wrench. She could feel the correct tension through her fingertips, a skill developed through thousands of hours of repetitive practice. The barreled action seated into the stock with perfect alignment, the bedding compound making contact exactly as designed. The bolt slid home with the satisfying smoothness of a precision instrument, and Sarah worked the action several times to verify proper function. Each cycle was crisp and positive, the timing exactly as Remington had designed it decades earlier. She engaged the safety, checked it twice, and placed the rifle back on the counter. The entire process had taken less than 8 minutes.
The silence in the gun shop stretched like a taut wire, broken only by the soft hum of the ventilation system and the distant rumble of traffic outside. Jake stared at the reassembled rifle, then at Sarah, then back at the rifle again. His mental calculations were evident on his weathered face. He was trying to reconcile what he'd just witnessed with his preconceptions about this soft-spoken woman who looked more at home in a corporate conference room than a machine shop. Marcus cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the quiet space. "Okay, so you can field strip a hunting rifle. That's good, but this job requires more than textbook knowledge. We're talking about custom modifications, precision machining, dealing with customers who know their stuff. It's not just about following instructions." Sarah nodded, her expression neutral. She'd expected this response. Moving the goalposts was a predictable next step when her initial demonstration exceeded expectations. The challenge would keep escalating until she either failed to meet their standards or they ran out of increasingly difficult tests to throw at her. "What kind of custom work do you typically handle?" she asked, gesturing toward the shop's back room where she could see the outline of a lathe and milling machine through the partially open door. Tommy jumped at the opportunity to showcase the complexity of their work. He disappeared into the back room and emerged carrying a heavily modified AR-15 platform rifle. The weapon bristled with aftermarket components, a free-floating barrel, precision trigger, adjustable stock, and a custom muzzle device that spoke of serious accuracy work. "Customer brought this in last month," Tommy explained, his tone carrying the pride of craftsmanship. "Wanted it set up for precision shooting at extended ranges. We're talking sub-MOA accuracy at 600 yards. Had to blueprint the upper receiver, hand-lap the barrel extension, custom chamber the barrel for his specific ammunition load. The trigger work alone took 12 hours of hand-fitting." Sarah examined the rifle with professional interest, noting the quality of the work and the attention to detail. The machining was excellent, clean cuts, perfect tolerances, and a level of finish that spoke of genuine expertise. These men might be prejudiced, but they weren't incompetent. "Beautiful work," she said, meaning it. "The barrel extension work looks particularly clean. Did you use a reamer or boring bar for the chamber work?" Jake's eyebrows rose slightly. The question demonstrated technical knowledge that went beyond casual familiarity. Chamber work was advanced gunsmithing, requiring specialized tools and considerable skill. The difference between a reamer and boring bar approach wasn't something you'd learn from internet forums or basic training courses. "Combination of both," Jake admitted grudgingly. "Started with a boring bar to get the rough dimensions, then finished with a custom reamer for the final chamber specifications." "Why?" "The finish looks like reamer work, but I can see tool marks that suggest boring bar preparation. It's a smart approach, gives you better control over the final dimensions." Sarah handed the rifle back to Tommy. "What's your typical turnaround time for this level of work?" "Depends on the complexity, but usually 3 to 4 weeks for something like this. We've got a backlog right now because—" Jake paused, suddenly remembering why they were having this conversation in the first place. They needed help. Their reputation for quality work had generated more business than they could handle with their current staffing. "Because you need another gunsmith," Sarah finished for him. "Right. But like I said, this isn't beginner work. We can't afford to have someone learning on the job with customer weapons. One mistake could cost us our reputation, not to mention potential liability issues." Sarah reached into her bag again and withdrew her smartphone. She scrolled through her photo gallery and found what she was looking for: images of her own custom work. The first photo showed a heavily modified 1911 pistol, its slide adorned with intricate engraving and fitted with a barrel that gleamed with the deep blue-black of proper heat treatment. "I built this last year for a competitive shooter. Complete trigger job, barrel fitting, accuracy package. The customer wanted consistent 1.5-inch groups at 50 yards with match ammunition." Jake studied the photograph, his experienced eye noting details that most people would miss. The slide-to-frame fit looked exceptional, with gaps so minimal they were barely visible. The trigger appeared to be a custom piece, possibly hand-fitted. The barrel hood showed evidence of precision lapping work. Sarah swiped to the next image, a bolt-action rifle that had been transformed from a basic hunting weapon into a precision instrument. The stock had been bedded with what looked like pillars and compound bedding, the barrel was free-floated with a custom handguard, and the bolt appeared to have been blueprinted and polished. "This one was more challenging," she continued. "Customer inherited his grandfather's rifle but wanted to modernize it for long-range target shooting. Had to completely rebuild the action, blueprint everything, install a new barrel with custom chambering for 6.5 Creedmoor. The stock work alone took 2 weeks." Marcus leaned over Jake's shoulder to examine the photos, his skepticism beginning to waver. The work was clearly professional grade, not the kind of modifications that could be faked or accomplished through shortcuts. Someone had invested serious time and skill in these projects. "Where did you do this work? I mean, what shop?" "My home workshop," Sarah replied simply. "I've been building it up over the past 5 years. Started with basic hand tools and a bench grinder, but I've gradually added a lathe, mill, surface grinder, and most of the specialized equipment needed for precision gunsmithing." The three men exchanged another look, this one less dismissive than before. Home workshops were common among serious gunsmiths, but the level of equipment she was describing represented a significant investment, both in money and in commitment to the craft. Jake scrolled through more photos, each one showing work of increasing complexity and sophistication. There were images of custom barrel installations, trigger modifications that required precise measurement and hand-fitting, and stock work that demonstrated both technical skill and artistic sensibility. But photographs could be misleading. They could show finished results without revealing the process, the mistakes, or the level of actual skill involved. Jake handed the phone back to Sarah, his expression still guarded. Impressive photos, but pictures don't tell the whole story. We need someone who can work efficiently, handle multiple projects simultaneously, and maintain quality standards even when they're under pressure. This isn't a hobby shop. It's a business with demanding customers and tight deadlines. Sarah pocketed her phone and looked directly at Jake. What would convince you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jake glanced at his employees, both of whom seemed to be waiting for his decision. The rational part of his mind acknowledged that she demonstrated more knowledge and skill than most of their previous applicants, but decades of ingrained assumptions fought against the evidence of his own eyes. "I'll tell you what," Jake said finally, his voice carrying the tone of someone who thought he was being generous. "We've got 3 rifles in the back that customers dropped off for basic maintenance. Nothing too complex. Cleaning, minor adjustments, scope mounting. If you can handle all 3 properly and efficiently, maybe we can talk about a trial period." Sarah smiled, the first genuinely pleased expression she'd shown since entering the shop. "I'd be happy to. When would you like me to start?"
The back room of Jake's gun shop was a testament to decades of accumulated expertise and barely organized chaos. Workbenches lined the walls, their surfaces scarred by years of use, and stained with the patina of gun oil, solvent, and metal shavings. A vintage South Bend lathe dominated one corner, its cast iron ways polished smooth by countless hours of operation, while a Bridgeport milling machine stood ready nearby, its vice jaws bearing the marks of precise work. The air carried the distinctive aroma of Hops No. 9 solvent mixed with the metallic tang of machined steel. Jake led Sarah to a cluttered workbench where 3 rifles lay waiting, each tagged with a work order describing the requested services. The weapons appeared to be a cross-section of typical gun shop business, a mix of hunting rifles and tactical platforms that required different skills and approaches. Sarah immediately recognized the setup for what it was, a comprehensive test designed to evaluate not just her technical knowledge, but her ability to work efficiently under observation while maintaining professional standards. "Here's the deal," Jake announced, his arms crossed as he leaned against a tool cabinet. "Customer pickup is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, which gives you about 6 hours to complete all 3 jobs. No exceptions, no extensions. Our reputation depends on meeting deadlines." He gestured toward the first rifle, a well-worn Savage 110 in 30-06 caliber. "This one needs a complete cleaning, scope ring installation, and bore sighting. The customer complained about accuracy issues, so you'll need to check the barrel for any obvious problems." The second weapon was a modern sporting rifle built on the AR-15 platform, its black polymer furniture and tactical accessories marking it as a recent purchase by an enthusiast shooter. "This one's brand new. Customer wants it completely broken down, cleaned, and properly lubricated before first use. Standard new rifle prep. But he's also requesting a trigger adjustment to reduce pull weight from factory specs." The third rifle made Sarah's pulse quicken slightly with professional interest. It was a vintage Mauser K98K, probably from the 1940s, based on the markings she could see from across the bench. The wood stock showed the beautiful patina of age and careful maintenance, while the metal surfaces retained much of their original finish despite decades of existence. "The Mauser is the tricky one," Jake admitted, though his tone suggested he expected it to be Sarah's downfall. "The customer inherited it from his grandfather and wants it checked for safe operation. The bolt's been sticking, and he's concerned about headspace issues.
You'll need to verify the headspace, diagnose the bolt problem, and provide a written assessment of the rifle's condition and safety for shooting modern ammunition. Tommy chimed in with barely concealed smugness. Oh, and all work needs to be documented. We keep detailed records of everything we do for liability reasons. Service sheets, measurements, parts used, recommendations, the whole 9 yards. Sarah nodded, already mentally organizing her approach to the tasks. The work represented a good sampling of typical gunsmithing duties, from routine maintenance to diagnostic problem solving. The time constraint was challenging, but not impossible, provided she worked efficiently and avoided unnecessary complications. "What about tools and equipment?" she asked, scanning the workshop's impressive array of specialized instruments. "Used whatever you need," Marcus replied, gesturing broadly at the surrounding workspace. "But remember, these are precision tools that cost more than most people's cars. Break something, and it comes out of your pay, assuming you get paid at all." The implicit threat was clear enough, but Sarah had worked with similar equipment for years and understood the importance of proper tool care. She began by examining each rifle more closely, developing a mental workflow that would maximize efficiency while ensuring thorough attention to each task. The Savage 110 showed typical hunting rifle wear, honest use without abuse, but with some corrosion in the barrel and action that suggested storage in less than ideal conditions. The scope rings that came with it were basic Weaver-style mounts that would require careful alignment to prevent scope damage. The AR-15 was indeed factory fresh, its components still bearing the slight roughness and tool marks characteristic of mass production. The trigger would need careful attention. Reducing pull weight on a factory trigger required precise adjustment to maintain safety while achieving the desired performance improvement. But the Mauser presented the most interesting challenge. These rifles were built to incredible standards of precision and durability, but 70-plus years of existence could introduce problems that required both technical knowledge and historical understanding to properly diagnose. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Sarah selected her initial tools, a basic disassembly kit, cleaning supplies, and precision measuring instruments. She started with the Savage, reasoning that getting the most straightforward job completed first would free up mental bandwidth for the more complex tasks later. The rifle stripped down easily, revealing an action that was mechanically sound but desperately in need of attention. Copper fouling streaked the barrel, and carbon buildup in the chamber suggested the previous owner had been negligent about regular cleaning. Sarah selected appropriate solvents and began the methodical process of removing years of accumulated residue. While the Savage soaked, she turned her attention to the AR-15, breaking it down into its major component groups with practiced efficiency. The direct impingement gas system was typical for the platform, reliable but requiring a regular cleaning due to the hot gases being vented directly into the bolt carrier group. Jake, Marcus, and Tommy maintained their positions around the workshop, ostensibly organizing inventory or performing other tasks, but clearly keeping Sarah under observation. Their conversation was deliberately loud enough for her to overhear. Comments about previous applicants who had failed similar tests, speculation about how long she would last before giving up, and thinly veiled jokes about women who bit off more than they could chew. Sarah ignored the commentary and focused on her work. The AR-15's trigger was a standard mil-spec design, functional but with the heavy, gritty pull characteristic of components designed for military durability rather than precision shooting. Reducing the pull weight would require careful adjustment of the trigger spring tension and possibly some light polishing of contact surfaces to improve the feel. She documented each step meticulously, noting part numbers, measurements, and observations on the service sheets provided. Professional documentation wasn't just about liability, it was about building trust with customers who needed to understand exactly what work had been performed on their firearms. The Savage's barrel was responding well to the copper solvent, the green-stained patches gradually giving way to cleaner results as she worked through the cleaning process. The chamber and throat showed some erosion consistent with the rifle's apparent age and use, but nothing that would affect safety or accuracy significantly. Time was passing steadily,
and Sarah found herself settling into the familiar rhythm of detailed technical work. The noise and distractions of the shop faded into background awareness as her attention focused completely on the tasks at hand. This was the mental state she'd learned to cultivate over years of complex projects. A zone of concentrated effort where problems became puzzles to be solved rather than obstacles to overcome.
2 hours into her examination, Sarah had the Savage 110 completely cleaned and was in the process of installing the scope rings with meticulous precision. Each ring was carefully aligned using a set of precision bars, ensuring that the scope tube wouldn't be stressed by misalignment, a common cause of accuracy problems that many amateur installers overlooked. The ring screws were torqued to exact specifications, tight enough to prevent movement under recoil, but not so tight as to distort the delicate internal mechanisms of the optic. Jake found himself drawn closer to observe her technique, his initial skepticism gradually being replaced by professional curiosity. The alignment bars she was using were expensive precision tools that most casual gunsmiths didn't even know existed, let alone understand how to use properly. Her systematic approach and attention to detail spoke of someone who understood that scope mounting was as much science as art. "Most people just eyeball the alignment," Jake commented, unable to keep the observation to himself. Sarah didn't look up from her work as she replied, "Most people also wonder why their expensive scopes don't hold zero." She made a minute adjustment to the rear ring, checking the alignment again with the precision bars. A few minutes of extra work here can save hours of frustration at the range. The bore sighting process that followed demonstrated the same methodical approach. Using a collimator inserted into the chamber, Sarah aligned the scope's reticle with remarkable precision, creating a starting point that would minimize ammunition waste during final zeroing. She documented the process thoroughly, including the specific adjustments made and recommendations for the customer's first range session. With the Savage completed and set aside, Sarah turned her full attention to the AR-15. The rifle had been completely disassembled, its components laid out on the bench in perfect order. Each part gleamed from thorough cleaning, but more importantly, she had identified several areas where the factory's mass production methods had left room for improvement. "The trigger pins are showing some peening," she noted aloud, indicating tiny marks where the hardened steel pins had been deformed by repeated cycling. Nothing dangerous, but it's contributing to the gritty feel. A few minutes with some fine abrasive compound will smooth things out considerably. Marcus moved closer to examine her work, his expression showing grudging respect. "You're right about the pin wear. I've seen it before on high round count rifles, but this one's practically brand new." "Factory quality control varies," Sarah explained, carefully polishing the trigger pins with ultra-fine compound. "Even new rifles can benefit from a detail cleaning and minor refinements. The customer will notice the difference immediately." She paused in her work to document the condition and her corrective actions, adding sketches to illustrate the wear patterns she'd identified. The trigger modification required delicate work with springs and adjustment screws, each change affecting the overall feel and safety of the mechanism. She used a trigger pull gauge to measure the factory weight, a heavy 7.5 pounds, before beginning her adjustments. The customer had requested a reduction to 4 pounds, a significant change that required careful attention to maintain the rifle's safety systems. Working with microscopic precision, she adjusted the trigger spring tension incrementally, testing the pull weight after each modification. The process was painstakingly slow, but essential for achieving the desired result without compromising safety. A trigger that was too light could be dangerous. One that was adjusted incorrectly could fail to reset properly or, worse, could fire without being pulled at all. Tommy watched the process with growing interest, his initial dismissiveness replaced by professional fascination. "How do you know when you've got it right?" he asked, genuinely curious about her technique. "It's not just about the weight," Sarah replied, continuing her careful adjustments. "The break needs to be crisp and predictable with minimal overtrail and positive reset. It's the difference between a trigger that just happens to be lighter and one that actually improves the shooter's accuracy." She demonstrated with a few dry fire cycles, the mechanism producing a clean, sharp click that spoke of precision adjustment. The final result was exactly 4 pounds of pull weight. But more importantly, it was a trigger that felt completely different from the factory original. The take-up was smooth, the break was glass crisp, and the reset was positive and audible. Sarah documented everything, meticulously, including before and after measurements and detailed notes about the modifications performed. But it was the vintage Mauser that would provide the real test of her capabilities. The rifle represented not just technical challenges, but historical significance. These weapons had been manufactured to exacting German military specifications, using methods and materials that were different from modern production techniques. Diagnosing problems in such rifles required understanding of both contemporary standards and historical manufacturing practices. The bolt was indeed sticking, but determining the cause required systematic investigation. She began by removing the bolt entirely, examining it for obvious damage or excessive wear. The bolt face was clean and properly formed, the extractor showed appropriate spring tension, and the firing pin moved freely within its channel. The problem became apparent when she examined the bolt lugs under magnification. Years of use and possibly inadequate lubrication had created minute scoring where the steel surfaces contacted during cycling. The damage wasn't severe, but it was sufficient to cause the binding that the customer had noticed. "Lug wear," she announced, showing the marks to Jake through a magnifying glass. "Probably from dry firing or inadequate lubrication over the years. The damage is superficial. It can be polished out without affecting the rifle's strength or accuracy." Jake studied the magnified view, nodding slowly. "Good catch. I've seen guys miss that and blame it on headspace problems." He paused, then added with less hostility than before, "Speaking of which, what's your assessment of the headspace?" Sarah had already considered this crucial safety issue. Excessive headspace in a rifle could cause case ruptures, potentially injuring the shooter or damaging the weapon. Using precision gauges, she had measured the chamber dimensions against established military specifications for the 8-meter Mauser cartridge. "Headspace is actually excellent," she reported, showing the measurements on her documentation. "Well within military specifications and probably safer than a lot of modern rifles. Whoever maintained this weapon over the years knew what they were doing."
As Sarah moved into the final phase of her work, the atmosphere in the shop had undergone a subtle but unmistakable transformation. The initial skepticism had given way to reluctant respect, then growing interest, and finally to something approaching professional admiration. Jake found himself genuinely curious about her techniques, while Marcus and Tommy had abandoned any pretense of working on other projects and were openly observing her methods. The Mauser restoration required the most delicate touch. After identifying the lug wear as the source of the bolt binding, Sarah had carefully polished the affected surfaces using progressively finer abrasives until the bolt cycled with the smooth precision that German engineers had designed into the system 80 years earlier. But polishing was only part of the solution. Proper lubrication was essential to prevent future problems. Sarah selected a high-quality gun grease specifically formulated for vintage military rifles, applying it sparingly to the bolt lugs and bearing surfaces. Too much lubrication would attract dirt and debris. Too little would allow the wear patterns to return. The amount had to be precisely calibrated based on the rifle's intended use and storage conditions. The customer mentioned wanting to shoot this occasionally, she noted while documenting the lubrication procedure. "I'm recommending a maintenance schedule that will keep it functioning properly without over-servicing. These rifles were designed to be robust, but they do require appropriate care." Jake watched as she cycled the bolt repeatedly, testing the action's smoothness and listening for any signs of binding or irregularity. The transformation was remarkable. What had been a stiff, reluctant mechanism now operated with the fluid efficiency that made the Mauser action legendary among rifle enthusiasts. "Impressive," Jake admitted, his tone carrying genuine respect for the first time since Sarah had entered the shop. "Most people would have just recommended a complete action job. That would have been a $1,000 repair instead of a $50 cleaning and adjustment." "The rifle didn't need a complete rebuild," Sarah replied simply. "Good diagnostics prevent unnecessary work. The customer gets their family heirloom back in proper working order without destroying its historical value or emptying their wallet." With all 3 rifles completed, Sarah turned to the final requirement: comprehensive documentation. Her service sheets were works of art in themselves, combining technical precision with clear explanations that customers could understand. Each measurement was recorded, every procedure was described, and recommendations for future maintenance were detailed with specific timelines and instructions. The documentation process revealed another layer of her expertise. She included photographs of problem areas before and after treatment, sketches illustrating proper maintenance techniques, and even ammunition recommendations based on each rifle's specific characteristics and intended use. It was the kind of thorough service that built customer loyalty and separated professional gunsmiths from hobbyists. Jake examined the completed paperwork with growing amazement. In his 25 years of running the shop, he'd never seen service documentation this comprehensive. Most gunsmiths, himself included, kept minimal records, noting what was done, but rarely providing the educational value that would help customers maintain their firearms properly. "This is really professional work," he said, flipping through the pages. "Your customers must love getting reports like this." "Education is part of the service," Sarah explained. "Most people want to take good care of their firearms, but they don't always know how. Giving them proper information builds trust and prevents problems down the road." Marcus was examining the AR-15's trigger, dry firing it repeatedly to feel the improvement Sarah had achieved. "This is amazing," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "It feels like a completely different rifle. How long did the trigger work take you?" Sarah checked her notes. "About 45 minutes, including documentation. It's mostly a matter of understanding the relationship between the springs and contact surfaces. Once you know what to adjust and how it affects the overall feel, the work goes pretty quickly." Tommy had claimed the Savage 110, mounting it to his shoulder and working the bolt action with obvious satisfaction. "The customer's going to be thrilled with this," he pronounced. "The scope mounting alone probably saved him 100 rounds of ammunition trying to get it zeroed." The 3 rifles sat on the bench like testimony to Sarah's capabilities, each one representing a different aspect of professional gunsmithing, and each one completed to a standard that exceeded the shop's typical work. But more than the technical excellence, it was the efficiency that impressed Jake the most. The entire process had taken just under 4 hours, leaving time to spare before the promised deadline. "I have to ask," Jake said, setting down the service paperwork, "where did you really learn to do this? I've been in this business for decades, and I never seen someone with your combination of technical knowledge and practical skill. This isn't the kind of work you pick up from books or weekend courses." Sarah's response was matter-of-fact, without false modesty or boastfulness. "My father owned a precision machining business when I was growing up. I spent most of my childhood in his shop, learning to use lathes and mills before I was tall enough to reach them safely. When I got interested in firearms, the mechanical principles were already familiar. It was just a matter of applying precision machining techniques to a specialized field." She paused, organizing her tools with the same methodical care she'd shown throughout the demonstration. "I've been doing custom gunsmithing for about 8 years now, but mostly through word-of-mouth referrals. I decided it was time to work in a professional shop environment, to learn the business side and expand my experience with different types of work." Jake found himself in an unfamiliar position. For the first time in his career, he was looking at someone whose technical skills probably exceeded his own. The work she had demonstrated wasn't just competent, it was exceptional. The kind of quality that could elevate his shop's reputation and allow them to take on more challenging projects. But admitting he'd been wrong meant confronting decades of assumptions about gender, capability, and what a gunsmith was supposed to look like. It meant acknowledging that his first impressions had not just been inaccurate, but embarrassingly so. Marcus saved him from having to navigate that internal struggle immediately. "Jake," he said, his voice carrying an urgency that made everyone look up, "we need to talk, now." The tone suggested something more significant than a simple employment discussion. Sarah continued organizing her workspace, but her attention was clearly focused on whatever had prompted Marcus's sudden intensity. "What's wrong?" Jake asked, moving closer to his employee. Marcus glanced at Sarah, then back at Jake, clearly uncertain about speaking freely in front of someone who was still technically an outsider. Remember that contract we bid on last month? The one for the police department's precision rifle program? Jake's expression shifted immediately. The police contract was a potential game changer for their business, a long-term agreement to maintain and modify rifles for the department's tactical unit. The work would be prestigious, profitable, and could lead to similar contracts with other law enforcement agencies. But it required capabilities they weren't sure they possessed. They just called. They want to move forward, but they need a demonstration next week. 3 rifles, different platforms, all requiring custom modifications for specific operational requirements. Marcus paused, the weight of the situation evident in his expression. The kind of work we've never done before. Sarah looked up from her tool organization, her interest clearly piqued by the mention of precision rifle work. The timing of this development, coming immediately after her demonstration, seemed almost too convenient to be a coincidence. "What kind of modifications?" she asked, her professional curiosity overriding any concerns about propriety. Jake and Marcus exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes. They were facing a critical decision that could determine the future of their business. They needed capabilities they didn't currently possess, and they needed them immediately. The woman they dismissed as unsuitable an hour earlier might be exactly what they needed to succeed.
The gravity of the situation settled over the gun shop like a heavy blanket. Jake's face had gone pale as he processed the implications of Marcus's announcement. The police contract represented more than just business. It was validation, a chance to prove that their small operation could compete with larger, more established shops. But it also carried enormous risk. Failure would not only cost them the contract, but could damage their reputation throughout the law enforcement community. "Tell me exactly what they're asking for," Jake said, his voice tight with controlled tension. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his notes from the call. 3 different platforms. First is a standard patrol rifle, AR-15 platform, but they want it optimized for accuracy and reliability under adverse conditions. Second is a designated marksman rifle, bolt action, effective range out to 800 meters with sub-MOA accuracy guaranteed. Third is... He paused, clearly uncomfortable with the complexity of the request. Third is a specialty rifle for their tactical team. Suppressed, night vision compatible, modular configuration for different mission requirements. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. These weren't routine modifications. They were comprehensive custom builds that would test every aspect of a gunsmith's capabilities. The technical challenges alone were formidable, but the added pressure of law enforcement requirements made the project exponentially more complex. Police firearms had to function flawlessly under the worst possible conditions, with lives depending on their reliability. "What's the timeline?" Jake asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't be favorable. "Demonstration next Friday. If they approve our work, we get a 5-year maintenance contract plus priority consideration for all future modifications." Marcus's voice carried the weight of opportunity and impossibility in equal measure. "But if we fail the demonstration..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Word traveled fast in law enforcement circles. A failed demonstration wouldn't just cost them this contract, it would effectively eliminate them from consideration for any similar work in the future. Tommy had been listening in growing disbelief. That's 6 days to build 3 custom rifles from scratch? It's impossible. We'd need weeks just to source the components, let alone do the actual work. Jake stood silent for a long moment, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the workbench as he stared at the 3 rifles Sarah had just completed. The quality of her work mocked his earlier assumptions, but it also offered a glimmer of hope he'd been afraid to acknowledge. "What components do they want?" Sarah asked quietly, her analytical mind already working through the logistical challenges. "And do they have specific requirements for part sourcing, or do we have flexibility in component selection?" Marcus looked surprised that she was asking detailed questions rather than backing away from the complexity. They gave us a wish list, but they're more concerned with performance specifications than specific brands. They want documented test results, maintenance schedules, and warranty coverage for all work performed. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. The timing is tight, but not impossible if we approach it systematically. The patrol rifle is straightforward. Good barrel, free float handguard, quality optics, proven reliability modifications. The designated marksman rifle is more complex, but the principles are well established. The tactical rifle, she paused, considering the challenges. That's where things get interesting. Jake found himself staring at this woman who had completely upended his expectations in the span of a few hours. Her casual assessment of a project that had him considering surrender suggested either dangerous overconfidence or capabilities he hadn't fully grasped yet. "You think it's actually possible?" he asked, his voice carrying a mixture of hope and skepticism. "I think it depends on the team," Sarah replied diplomatically. "This isn't a one-person job, even with 6 days. It would require everyone working efficiently with clear task delegation and no time wasted on mistakes or miscommunication." She looked directly at Jake. "The question is whether you're willing to trust me as part of that team." The silence that followed was charged with tension. Jake was being forced to make a decision that went against every instinct he'd developed over decades in the firearms business. He was being asked to bet his shop's reputation on someone he'd been ready to dismiss as unsuitable less than an hour ago. Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. "Jake, I've been watching her work for the past 4 hours. The technical skills are there. The question is whether we can afford not to try." Tommy, who had been the most skeptical initially, surprised everyone by nodding agreement. "The work she did on that trigger alone is better than anything I've seen, and the documentation," he gestured at the service sheets Sarah had prepared. "The cops are going to love that level of detail." Jake looked around at his employees, then at Sarah, then at the 3 perfectly restored rifles that sat as evidence of her capabilities. The smart business decision was obvious, but it required him to admit that he'd been wrong about something fundamental to his worldview. "What would you need?" he asked, finally, his voice hoarse with the effort of suppressing his pride. "Access to your supplier network, a clear understanding of the budget parameters, and authority to make component selections based on performance requirements rather than cost considerations," Sarah replied without hesitation, suggesting she'd already been thinking through the logistics. "And I'd need everyone to understand that the next 6 days are going to be intense. 12-hour days, 7 days a week, with no margin for error." Jake nodded slowly. The requirements are reasonable, but they represent a fundamental shift in how his shop operated. He'd always maintained tight control over purchasing decisions and project management. Delegating that authority to someone he'd known for less than an hour went against every business instinct he'd developed. "What about your other commitments?" Marcus asked practically. "Don't you have customers waiting for work?" "I can reschedule most of my current projects. The few that are time-sensitive can be completed in the evenings. But I want to be clear about something. If we do this, we do it right. No shortcuts, no compromises on quality, and no excuses if we encounter problems. The police department needs to know they can trust their lives to these rifles." The weight of that responsibility settled over everyone in the room. Police firearms weren't just tools. They were life insurance policies for officers who face dangerous situations every day. The margin for error was exactly 0. Jake made his decision with the sudden clarity that sometimes comes when all options except one have been eliminated. "All right," he said, his voice stronger now that the choice had been made. "We do this, all of us, working together for the next 6 days." He looked directly at Sarah. "You're in charge of technical specifications and quality control. Marcus handles procurement and logistics. Tommy assists wherever needed. I'll manage customer communications and handle any administrative requirements." Sarah nodded, already shifting into project management mode. "First priority is component sourcing. We need to identify suppliers who can deliver quality parts on an accelerated timeline. Second priority is workspace organization. We'll need dedicated areas for each rifle to prevent confusion or cross-contamination of parts. Third priority is establishing quality checkpoints throughout the process to catch problems early. The transformation in the shop's atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. What had been a casual workplace with flexible schedules and individual priorities suddenly became a focused team with a shared mission. The police contract had changed everything, forcing old assumptions and prejudices aside in favor of practical necessity. One more thing, Sarah added, her tone serious. We need to discuss what happens after the demonstration. If we succeed, this changes the nature of your business permanently. Police contracts bring scrutiny, regulatory requirements, and performance standards that are different from civilian work. Everyone needs to understand what they're signing up for. Jake hadn't considered the long-term implications, but he realized she was right. Success would bring opportunities, but also obligations and pressures they'd never faced before. The small, relaxed gun shop he'd operated for decades might cease to exist, replaced by something more professional, but potentially less personal. But that was a concern for the future. Right now, they had 6 days to prove themselves capable of work they'd never attempted before, with a client whose standards allowed no margin for error.
The transformation of Jake's gun shop began at 6 a.m. the following morning. Sarah arrived to find the overhead lights already blazing and Jake hunched over component catalogs, his coffee cup leaving rings on pages of technical specifications. The casual atmosphere of the previous day had been replaced by the focused intensity of a team preparing for the most important project of their careers. "I've been thinking about the component sourcing all night," Jake said without looking up from his catalogs. "The designated marksman rifle is going to be the biggest challenge. We need a custom barrel, and most of the quality manufacturers have lead times measured in months, not days." Sarah had anticipated this problem and arrived with solutions. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contact list, a collection of suppliers, manufacturers, and specialists she'd cultivated over years of custom work. "I have a relationship with a barrel manufacturer in Oregon who does rush orders for law enforcement. They might be able to help us, but it's going to be expensive." "Cost isn't the primary concern right now," Jake replied, finally looking up from his catalogs. "The designated marksman rifle is going to be the biggest challenge. We need a custom barrel, and most of the quality manufacturers have lead times measured in months, not days." The shop door opened with its familiar chime, and Marcus entered carrying bags of breakfast sandwiches and a tray of coffee cups. Tommy followed close behind, looking uncharacteristically focused for someone who wasn't officially scheduled to work until noon. "Figured we'd need fuel for the long haul," Marcus announced, distributing the food. "I also stopped by the post office to set up overnight shipping accounts with all the major carriers. Whatever we order today needs to be here by Wednesday at the latest." Sarah accepted coffee gratefully and pulled out a legal pad covered with notes and sketches. "I spent most of last night researching the specific requirements for police precision rifles. There are industry standards we need to meet, plus department-specific preferences that could make or break the contract." She spread her notes across the workbench, revealing a comprehensive analysis of law enforcement rifle requirements. Accuracy standards, reliability testing protocols, maintenance schedules, and even ammunition specifications were detailed with the thoroughness of an engineering report. The patrol rifle needs to be accurate to 300 meters with standard ammunition, but the real requirement is reliability under adverse conditions, she explained, pointing to specific sections of her research. They'll test it with dirty ammunition, in extreme temperatures, and probably after dropping it in mud or sand. Accuracy means nothing if the rifle won't cycle properly when it's been abused. Tommy studied the requirements with growing appreciation for the complexity of the task. That rules out a lot of the fancy components we might normally use. We need proven, military-grade parts that prioritize function over form. Exactly, Sarah agreed. The designated marksman rifle is different. It's all about precision at extended range. Sub-MOA accuracy is non-negotiable, which means custom everything. Barrel, trigger, stock, optics mounting system. We're basically building a precision instrument that happens to be shaped like a rifle.
Jake had been listening while continuing to flip through catalogs, but Sarah's systematic approach was making him realize how unprepared he'd been for this level of complexity. His typical custom work involved improving existing rifles or making modifications requested by customers. Building completely custom weapons to exacting specifications was a different discipline entirely. "What about the tactical rifle?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Sarah's expression grew more serious. "That's where things get really complicated. Suppressed rifles have completely different engineering requirements. The suppressor affects barrel harmonics, changes the gas system pressure, and modifies the rifle's balance and handling characteristics. Plus, night vision compatibility means special attention to muzzle flash, optics mounting, and even the finish on metal surfaces." The complexity was daunting, but Sarah's methodical breakdown of requirements was also reassuring. She clearly understood the challenges and had given serious thought to solutions. What had seemed impossible 12 hours earlier was beginning to feel merely extremely difficult. "Component priorities," Sarah continued, consulting her notes. "For the patrol rifle, we need a proven barrel manufacturer, something with a track record in law enforcement sales. Chrome-lined bore for longevity, 1x7 twist rate for heavy bullets, and a contour that balances accuracy with heat dissipation." She moved to the next item on her list. "The designated marksman rifle needs a custom barrel from a precision manufacturer, heavy contour for accuracy, stainless steel construction, hand-lapped bore, and custom chamber dimensions matched to specific ammunition loads." "And the tactical rifle?" Tommy prompted. "That one requires the most specialized components. Barrel threaded for suppressor mounting, adjustable gas system to compensate for pressure changes, specialized buffer system to maintain cycling reliability, plus all the accessories need to be compatible with night vision equipment." Marcus had been taking notes throughout Sarah's briefing, his list growing longer with each requirement. "This is easily $100,000 in components," he calculated. "Maybe more, depending on the optics packages they want." Jake nodded grimly. "The contract value justifies the investment, but only if we succeed. If we fail the demonstration, we're left with extremely expensive inventory and no way to recover the costs." The financial pressure added another layer of stress to an already challenging situation. They weren't just risking their reputation, they were gambling with the shop's financial stability. Success would elevate their business to a new level. Failure could destroy it entirely. "I need to start making calls," Sarah said, checking her watch. "Most of my suppliers are on the West Coast, so I want to catch them before their day gets too busy. Jake, can you handle the initial contact with your regular distributors for standard components? Marcus, we need a complete inventory of what we already have in stock that might be suitable." The division of labor was natural and efficient, with each person taking responsibility for tasks that matched their expertise and relationships. But as they prepared to begin the most intense 6 days of their professional lives, the weight of expectation hung over everything. They were no longer just running a gun shop. They were competing for a contract that could define their future. And they were betting everything on the capabilities of a woman who 24 hours earlier, they hadn't even considered qualified for employment.
By Wednesday morning, Jake's gun shop had been transformed into something resembling a military logistics operation. Component boxes covered every available surface, tracking numbers were taped to the walls like a shipping manifest, and the air hummed with the constant activity of people working at maximum capacity. Sarah had claimed the main workbench as her command center, where she coordinated the complex choreography of 3 simultaneous rifle builds while monitoring quality at every stage. The patrol rifle had come together with surprising efficiency. Marcus had located a government surplus barrel that met all specifications while staying within budget constraints, and Tommy had proved surprisingly adept at assembling the free-float handguard system. But it was Sarah's attention to detail that elevated the build from functional to exceptional. "The gas system timing is critical," she explained, while making minute adjustments to the gas block position. "Too much gas pressure and the rifle becomes unreliable with dirty ammunition. Too little, and it won't cycle consistently under adverse conditions." She fired the action manually several times, listening to the subtle differences in sound that indicated proper timing.
Jake watched her work with growing admiration. Every adjustment was purposeful, every measurement was verified twice, and every component was tested before installation. The rifle that emerged from her efforts looked deceptively simple, but he could see the precision engineering hidden beneath its military appearance. The designated marksman rifle presented different challenges. The custom barrel had arrived Tuesday evening, shipped overnight from Oregon at considerable expense, and Sarah had spent the previous night carefully bedding it into a precision stock system. The work required patience and skill that couldn't be rushed. Epoxy bedding compound had to cure properly, and any mistakes would require starting over with new components. Bedding is one of those operations where experience matters more than tools, Sarah said, carefully removing the masking tape that had protected the stock's finish during the bedding process. The compound has to flow into exactly the right places, while being excluded from areas where it would interfere with the rifle's operation. The result was a marriage of barrel and stock so intimate that they function as a single unit, eliminating the microscopic movements that could degrade accuracy at long range. When Sarah test-fired the action, the metallic click was crisp and authoritative, promising the sub-MOA accuracy that police marksmen required. But it was the tactical rifle that pushed everyone's capabilities to their limits. The suppressor compatibility requirements had forced Sarah to rethink fundamental assumptions about rifle design, and the solutions she developed were innovative even by industry standards. Conventional wisdom says you adjust the gas system to compensate for suppressor back pressure, she explained, while installing a sophisticated adjustable gas block. But that approach only works if you're always using the same suppressor with the same ammunition. Police tactical teams need flexibility. They might need to remove the suppressor quickly or switch between different suppressor types depending on the mission. Her solution was elegant in its complexity, a gas system that could be adjusted quickly without tools, allowing the rifle to function properly with or without a suppressor and with different types of ammunition. The engineering was sophisticated enough to impress even experienced gunsmiths, but the operation was simple enough for officers to manage under stress. Thursday brought the first complete test firing of all three rifles. Sarah had arranged to use a private range owned by a former law enforcement officer who understood the importance of their project. The testing protocol was comprehensive: accuracy verification, reliability testing, and function checks under simulated adverse conditions. The patrol rifle performed flawlessly, printing groups that exceeded police department standards by a comfortable margin. More importantly, it continued to function reliably after deliberately being fouled with dirt and fired with dirty ammunition that would choke most civilian rifles. The key is understanding that police rifles are tools, not showpieces, Sarah explained, while cleaning carbon fouling from the bolt carrier group. They need to work when lives depend on them, regardless of how they've been treated or what conditions they've been exposed to. The designated marksman rifle's performance was even more impressive. At 300 meters, it produced groups that could be covered by a quarter, and the precision remained consistent across different ammunition types. The custom trigger work Sarah had performed gave the rifle a feel that was simultaneously familiar to experienced shooters and superior to anything they had used before. But it was the tactical rifle that generated the most excitement. The suppressed firing was remarkably quiet, reducing the sharp crack of supersonic ammunition to a sound that wouldn't wake sleeping neighbors. More importantly, the adjustable gas system allowed seamless transitions between suppressed and unsuppressed firing without any degradation in reliability or accuracy. This is professional-grade work, Jake admitted, as they packed the rifles for transport to the police department. I've never seen custom builds this sophisticated, and certainly not completed in 6 days. Friday morning arrived with the weight of final judgment. The police department's testing facility was more comprehensive than anything Sarah had imagined. Indoor ranges for precision work, outdoor courses that simulated real-world conditions, and a team of evaluators who understood firearms at a level that matched her own expertise. The demonstration began with accuracy testing. Each rifle fired from precision rests while police armorers verified measurements and documented performance. All three rifles exceeded specifications, but the evaluators seemed more interested in the systematic approach Sarah had taken to documentation and testing protocols. "Most vendors show us what their rifles can do," commented the department's lead armorer. You've shown us why they can do it and how we can maintain that performance over time. That level of technical understanding is exactly what we need in a long-term partner. The reliability testing was more dramatic. Rifles deliberately abused and then expected to function perfectly. Sarah watched with controlled anxiety as her carefully crafted weapons were dropped in sand, sprayed with water, and fired with deliberately dirty ammunition. But her engineering choices proved sound. All 3 rifles continued to function exactly as designed, regardless of the abuse they received. The final evaluation was the most nerve-wracking, a practical exercise where department officers used the rifles in simulated tactical scenarios. Sarah could only watch as her work was judged by the ultimate standard, whether it would serve effectively when lives were at stake.
The tactical simulation area resembled a small urban environment, complete with building facades, vehicles, and obstacles designed to replicate the complex scenarios police officers faced in real-world situations. Sarah stood in the observation area alongside Jake, Marcus, and Tommy, watching as 3 department officers put their custom rifles through the most demanding test possible, actual tactical exercises under time pressure and stress conditions. Officer Rodriguez had claimed the patrol rifle and was moving through a simulated building-clearing exercise. The rifle needed to transition quickly between close-quarters engagement and medium-range precision shots, all while being maneuvered through tight spaces and around obstacles. Sarah held her breath as Rodriguez performed a tactical reload under time pressure, the rifle's action cycling with mechanical precision despite the stress of rapid manipulation. "Smooth as butter," Rodriguez called out during a brief pause in the exercise. "The balance is perfect for transitions, and the trigger is crisp enough for precision work, but safe enough for dynamic movement." The approval in his voice was unmistakable, but Sarah knew the real test would come when fatigue and adrenaline made fine motor control more difficult. Sergeant Williams had taken the designated marksman rifle to the long-range portion of the course, where steel targets at various distances tested both the weapon's accuracy and the shooter's ability to make precise adjustments under time constraints. The custom rifle performed exactly as designed, allowing Williams to engage targets out to 600 meters with first-shot hits that drew appreciative murmurs from the evaluation team. "This is remarkable work," commented Captain Morrison, the department's firearms training coordinator. "The rifle shoots better than most of our officers, and the trigger system is intuitive enough that our people can adapt to it immediately." He made notes on his evaluation sheet, but his body language suggested the kind of enthusiasm that came from seeing equipment that would genuinely improve his officers' capabilities. But it was the tactical rifle demonstration that provided the most dramatic validation of Sarah's work. Officer Chen was conducting a simulated hostage scenario that required suppressed firing from concealment, followed by rapid transition to unsuppressed operation for backup engagement. The sophisticated gas system Sarah had designed allowed seamless transitions between firing modes without any adjustment period or reliability concerns. The suppressed shots were eerily quiet, their sound signature so reduced that observers had to watch for muzzle flash to know when the rifle was being fired. But when Chen removed the suppressor and continued firing, the rifle's operation remained unchanged. No shift in point of impact, no degradation in cycling reliability, no difference in felt recoil that would require shooter compensation. "I've never seen anything like this," Chen announced after completing the scenario. "Most suppressed rifles are either optimized for suppressed fire or unsuppressed fire, but not both. This system gives us tactical flexibility we've never had before." The evaluation team gathered for a brief conference while Sarah and her team waited with barely controlled anxiety. 6 days of intense work, thousands of dollars in components, and the future of their business all came down to this moment. Jake found himself sweating despite the cool morning air, while Marcus paced nervously and Tommy checked his watch repeatedly. Sarah remained outwardly calm, but internally she was reviewing every decision, every modification, every component choice that had gone into the 3 rifles. She'd done everything possible to ensure success, but the final judgment belonged to people whose lives would depend on the reliability and performance of her work. Captain Morrison approached their group with an expression that revealed nothing about the evaluation team's decision.
We need to discuss a few technical points before making our final determination, he said, his official tone giving no hint about their prospects. The questions that followed were detailed and probing, covering everything from maintenance schedules to parts availability to long-term durability expectations. But Sarah recognized them as the kind of questions asked by professionals who were already committed to moving forward. They were discussing implementation details, not whether to proceed at all. Your documentation is exceptional, Morrison continued, consulting his evaluation notes. The maintenance schedules, parts lists, and troubleshooting guides are exactly what we need to support these weapons throughout their service life. Jake felt a surge of pride, mixed with relief. The systematic approach Sarah had insisted upon was proving its value in ways he hadn't anticipated. Police departments didn't just buy equipment, they had to support it, maintain it, and justify it through budget cycles and administrative reviews. Your performance specifications exceed our requirements in every category, Morrison added, consulting his evaluation notes. But more importantly, the reliability testing demonstrates that these rifles will function when our officers need them most. That's the kind of confidence we require in life and death situations. The formal announcement came with characteristic police brevity. The department approves all 3 rifle designs for immediate procurement. We're prepared to execute the 5-year maintenance contract, as discussed, with an initial order of 24 rifles across the 3 configurations. The numbers were staggering. 24 custom rifles at the prices they'd discussed represented more revenue than Jake's shop typically generated in 2 years. But beyond the financial impact was the validation, recognition that their small operation could compete with major manufacturers and deliver professional-grade results under demanding conditions. Sarah felt the tension drain from her shoulders as handshakes and congratulations were exchanged. But her satisfaction came less from the business success than from the knowledge that her work would serve officers who put their lives at risk to protect others. The rifles she'd designed would become tools that might mean the difference between officers going home safely or becoming casualties themselves. As they loaded their equipment for the return trip to the shop, Jake found himself looking at Sarah with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. 6 days earlier, he'd dismissed her as unsuitable for basic employment. Now, she'd delivered a contract that would transform his business and establish their reputation throughout the law enforcement community. The drive back to the shop was filled with excited conversation about expanded capabilities, additional equipment needs, and the long-term implications of their success. But underlying the celebration was a sobering awareness that they'd committed to maintaining the highest possible standards for clients whose lives depended on their work. They were no longer just running a gun shop. They'd become critical suppliers to people who served and protected their community. It was an honor and a responsibility that would shape everything they did going forward.
6 months later, Jake's gun shop bore little resemblance to the cramped, cluttered space where Sarah had first faced skepticism and dismissal. The front retail area had been expanded and modernized, with professional display cases showcasing examples of their custom work alongside certificates from law enforcement agencies and precision shooting organizations. A new sign outside read Martinez and Associates Precision Firearms, acknowledging the partnership that had transformed a small-town gun shop into a regional center of excellence. Sarah stood at the main workbench, now expanded to accommodate multiple complex projects simultaneously, putting the finishing touches on a custom rifle for a federal law enforcement agency. The work was similar to the police contract that had started everything, but the complexity had evolved significantly. Where the original project had pushed the boundaries of their capabilities, this latest commission was being completed with the confident efficiency of an established team. The shop's transformation extended far beyond physical improvements. Marcus had been promoted to operations manager, coordinating the complex logistics of government contracts and civilian custom work. Tommy had discovered an aptitude for precision machining and was now handling sophisticated barrel work that would have been outsourced 6 months earlier. And Jake, initially resistant to change, had embraced his role as the business development leader, leveraging their reputation to secure contracts with agencies across 3 states. But the most significant change was in the shop's culture. The casual atmosphere of before had been replaced with something more purposeful, a workplace where precision and professionalism were expected rather than exceptional.
New employees were hired based on skill and dedication rather than assumptions about who belonged in the firearms industry. "Sarah, we've got a situation," Marcus announced, entering from the front office with a concerned expression. "3 officers from the county sheriff's department are here. They want to speak with you specifically about the rifles we delivered last month." The familiar knot of anxiety formed in Sarah's stomach. Customer complaints were rare, but when they involved law enforcement equipment, the stakes were enormous. Officer safety wasn't just a business concern, it was a moral obligation that kept her awake when problems arose. "What kind of situation?" she asked, setting down her tools and following Marcus toward the front of the shop. They wouldn't give me details, just said they needed to discuss the performance of their designated marksman rifles with the person who built them. Sarah entered the retail area to find 3 uniformed officers waiting with expressions that revealed nothing about their purpose. Their body language was professional but tense, suggesting this wasn't a routine visit or a casual conversation about equipment performance. "I'm Sarah Martinez," she said, extending her hand to the senior officer. "I understand you wanted to discuss the rifles we built for your department." Sergeant Patterson shook her hand with a grip that conveyed both strength and respect. "We did. Yesterday, one of our officers used the rifle you built in a situation that probably saved 2 lives. We wanted you to hear it directly." The relief Sarah felt was immediately replaced by intense curiosity. Real-world performance was the ultimate test of any equipment, but it was rare to get detailed feedback about how custom firearms performed in actual tactical situations. "What happened?" she asked, gesturing toward the shop's small conference area where they could speak privately. Patterson's account was methodical and detailed, delivered with the precision of someone accustomed to writing official reports. A domestic violence call had escalated into a hostage situation, with an armed suspect holding 2 children in a house surrounded by law enforcement. The suspect had been making demands while remaining mobile within the building, creating a complex tactical challenge that required precision engagement from an extended range. Officer Williams was positioned about 400 meters from the target building. He had a clear shot when the suspect exposed himself near a window, but the angle was difficult, and the consequences of a miss were unacceptable. He needed to place his shot within a 2-inch circle to neutralize the threat without endangering the hostages. Sarah found herself holding her breath as Patterson described the shot, a single round fired under extreme pressure, with lives hanging on the balance and no opportunity for correction if the equipment failed to perform as designed. Clean hit, center mass, immediate incapacitation. The hostages were recovered safely, and our tactical team secured the scene without further incident. Officer Williams credits the rifle's accuracy and his confidence in the equipment for making the shot possible. The weight of that responsibility settled over Sarah like a blanket. Somewhere in her workshop, late at night 6 months earlier, she had made decisions about barrel specifications, trigger adjustments, and bedding techniques that had ultimately contributed to saving 2 children's lives. The precision work that she approached as an intellectual challenge had real-world consequences that extended far beyond business success. "We wanted you to know," added Officer Chen, who had been part of the original evaluation team, "that your work doesn't just meet specifications, it enables our people to do their jobs better and safer. That matters more than any contract or business relationship." Jake, who had been listening from nearby, stepped forward with obvious pride. "Sarah, why don't you show them the new project you've been working on?" Sarah led the group to her current workbench, where a rifle, unlike anything they'd seen before, was taking shape. The design incorporated lessons learned from 6 months of law enforcement feedback, combined with innovative solutions to problems that conventional firearms couldn't address. "It's a modular system," she explained, indicating the rifle's sophisticated architecture. "Same basic platform, but it can be configured for different mission requirements in minutes rather than hours. Patrol configuration, designated marksman setup, or close quarters battle, all with the same training requirements and maintenance procedures." The officers examined the rifle with the expert attention of professionals who understood both the technical challenges and the operational advantages of such a system. Their questions were detailed and practical, focusing on reliability, maintenance, and field use considerations. "When will this be available?" Patterson asked, clearly impressed by the innovation and potential applications. "We're completing field testing now. If everything goes according to plan, we should have production models ready for evaluation in about 3 months. As the officers prepared to leave, Patterson turned back to Sarah with a final observation. When we first came here 6 months ago, some of our people had concerns about working with a shop that didn't have an established law enforcement track record. Now, agencies across the region are asking us for recommendations because they've heard about the quality of your work. After the officers departed, Sarah found herself alone with Jake in the transformed shop. The afternoon light streaming through the windows illuminated tools and equipment that represented capabilities they couldn't have imagined when she first walked through the door. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Jake asked, his voice carrying a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude, "when I assumed you couldn't handle the work because—" Sarah smiled, remembering the skepticism and the assumptions that seemed so insulting at the time. "I think about it often, but not because I'm angry about how I was treated initially. I think about it because it reminds me how important it is to let people show what they're capable of before deciding what they can't do." She gestured around the workshop where Marcus was training a new employee on precision measurement techniques, while Tommy operated the lathe with the confidence of someone who had discovered unexpected talents. Everyone in the shop has exceeded the expectations someone else had for them. Marcus was just a parts counter 6 months ago. Tommy was considered too old to learn new skills. You thought your business had reached its peak and couldn't grow any further. She paused, considering the transformation they'd all experienced. The real lesson isn't about gender or stereotypes, it's about recognizing potential even when it doesn't look like what we expect. Jake nodded, understanding that her success had changed not just their business, it had challenged fundamental assumptions about capability, expertise, and who belonged in traditionally male-dominated fields. "What's next?" he asked, looking toward the future with anticipation rather than anxiety. Sarah's response came without hesitation, reflecting months of planning and vision for continued growth. "We're going to become the standard for precision law enforcement firearms, not just in this region, but nationally. We're going to train other shops in our techniques, develop new technologies, and make sure that every officer who depends on precision equipment has access to the best tools possible." The ambition was enormous, but Jake no longer doubted her ability to achieve seemingly impossible goals. 6 months ago, she had walked into his shop carrying nothing but credentials and confidence. Today, she was reshaping an entire industry through the power of precision, dedication, and the willingness to exceed every expectation placed upon her. As the day wound down and the shop prepared to close, Sarah returned to her workbench for a final quality check on the federal agency rifle. Her hands, those supposedly too delicate hands that had been dismissed so casually, moved with the practiced confidence of someone who had proven that capability had nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with skill, knowledge, and determination. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, just as they had on that first day, but everything else had changed. Where there once had been skepticism, there was now respect. Where there once had been limitations, there was now possibilities. And where there once had been assumptions about who could and couldn't succeed, there was now proof that excellence could come from the most unexpected sources. The rifle was perfect, ready to serve officers who would trust their lives to the precision of her work. And tomorrow, Sarah would begin another project, continuing to prove that, when given the opportunity, dedicated people could exceed every expectation and redefine what was possible. The story had come full circle, but it was really just the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.